Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for what you have done for the TBA already and what you will do in leading your association, because it is your association. And that's the sort of the theme of what I'm going to carry through here this afternoon. I'm going to give you the overall organizational structure. That's the first piece I'm supposed to give you, the governance of the association. And then we're going to talk about our public policy process and how we arrive at public policy. Organizationally, of course, it does start with the members. We've got about 13,000 members. Continue to grow at a pretty good clip. Unlike many other associations, we continue to grow right through the recession, and the trajectory is good. We do that, we think, by maintaining relevance and by having great leaders like y'all to speak for us. Membership's divided up, as you can see from this chart, at about a quarter in East Tennessee, about a quarter in East Tennessee, almost 40% here in Middle Tennessee, and 19% in West Tennessee. That's roughly the same distribution, by the way, of lawyers in Tennessee. So it's not that we do any better in Middle Tennessee. It's just basically where they lie. Those members elect the Board of Governors, 27 members, who include the 6 officers, the Grand Division governors, the district governors, and then designated positions for the Speaker of the House, the young lawyer president and president-elect, the Judicial Conference, DA's Conference, Public Defenders Conference all have seats on the Board of Governors. And that's the corporate board of directors for the association. Within that group, the president, president-elect, and vice president, they are directly elected by the membership at large, and are all those positions rotate through the grand divisions, so that there's one from each of the grand divisions at a time. Obviously, Bill will be as president from Middle Tennessee. President-elect is from East Tennessee, Jason Long, and the vice president upcoming will be Lucian Para from Memphis. There's also within the association the House of Delegates, and the House is our policy recommending body. It's a broadly based group of officers, 2 from each judicial district. And if you think about the judicial districts, they can be big and small. They're distributed, obviously, principally throughout less populous areas, with 4 representatives from each of the 4 cities, and 3 young lawyer representatives. They make recommendations to the Board of Governors on matters of concern to the profession, is what the bylaws say. So, and they meet quarterly in advance of the board meetings to give some advice to the board regarding policy issues. There's an executive committee under the board specified in the bylaws. The executive committee includes the principal officers, the immediate past president, the secretary, and treasurer. Those are the 6 voting members. But then the committee chairs of the board committees are on there as ex officio, as is the general counsel. So Frank, when he was on the board, was chair of the operations committee, and Dutz was a non-voting member of the executive committee. Say what?
I think I voted anyway, but that's
He was a very influential member of the executive committee. That's right. We voted a couple of tombstones too, I think, Frank. The secretary is elected for a 1-year term by the Board of Governors. The treasurer for a 3-year term, and an assistant treasurer who's elected in the last year of the treasurer's term, so that there's a training period and continuity. Keeping up with our money is very important. And they're all elected by the board. The board also creates committees. In addition to the board committees that I mentioned just a moment ago, the other committees, Matt's the chair of the committee on the judiciary. There are about 12 or so committees that are often are seen as working as the the service arm of the association and the board. The CLE committee is governed by, or the CLE program is has the advice and ideas from the CLE committee. Sections. That's where most of y'all have come from or will come from when you start in your role as chair. And the sections are everything from a business type to or practice type to practice area. So litigation or dispute resolution, Bob, or practice areas, real estate, health law, like Denise was is here to represent. So within the sections, the opportunities to serve are obviously executive council membership, CLE programs, communications, and advocacy. And all of those are possible areas that you want to explore within your section in terms of people to be involved. On committees, again, opportunities to serve on CLE or communicate and advising communications or an advocacy role. Public education committee doing civics education or any of the other multitude of things going on. Hey, Abby. So, organizational structure. I wonder if that little pointer thing is working. I think not. Huh? There you go. Oh yeah, okay. So again, the Board of Governors at the sort of center of stuff, elected by the membership. House of Delegates elected to recommend on public policy, and then the officers elected and board committees. Mentioned just briefly, we, as any good conglomerate would be, and only a structure the lawyers could love, we have both a foundation, which is a 501c3 recognized charity, and a for-profit corporation as part of our constellation. The for-profit involved in insurance sales, malpractice, and other kinds of insurance products to our members. So they are those are both answerable to the Board of Governors. So the discussions of those at those meetings start off with they or we. There's not any distance between the two operations. They're just tax devices. So that's the TBA organization. Now, Steve or somebody will help me get up the other questions about the organization, organizational structure. We'll go back. There he is.
You mentioned advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Something that people could do in their
Sure.
committee chairs. And can you give us some examples of what that might be?
Well, it might be advocacy for rule change in the area that you practice in. It might be an advocacy for a rule, either an administrative rules change or the like. Now, all of this requires, and that's what the public policy piece here is going to be about. All of this requires approval up through the process. You can't just go off and do it yourself. But advocating for changes in rules, advocating for changes in statutes, advocating for other kinds of changes is certainly a central mission of many of the sections. As I was telling Brenda yesterday, family law every year has proposed legislation that needs, and even if we don't come up with something, you can bet the General Assembly is going to come up with some change in family law that needs our attention. Let's just put it that way.
And does that mean that the section needs to be of one voice on the change, or could the section say this is an area that needs attention and these are the different approaches that might be appropriate? That would also be an acceptable way to.
It would be.
I think you can bring it to the board, Darlene, and I mean, if it's something that's a hot topic or something that you know needs to be discussed, but even if you don't have a position, you can bring it to the board for discussion.
Okay.
And bring it to our attention.
Yeah.
I will say that sort of my experience is that we agree about 80% of the time on about 80% of the stuff. So it's it's not that many disagreements. We should not, though, get bogged down in and allow, just because there is an opposing viewpoint, say, oh, we're frozen from doing anything. We don't allow anybody to exercise a veto. If we did, we'd be frozen out of any kind of public policy discussion. But if we're satisfying 80% of our members 80% of the time, then I think we're doing well. There was, yeah, but Tim.
Say our experience, like in the construction section, has been, we get bills every year that affect construction. That's another hot topic. And the only time we'll weigh in on something, because we've worked with Alan on this, is if we do think most of the people in the group say, hey, this is a good idea, we'll do it. There are some bills that come up where, like, owners or banks or somebody will like it, or contractors will hate it, or subs will hate it, and on those things we won't take a position.
Yeah, where there are clear winners and losers.
Right, right.
That's right.
Just looking for a fair advantage, right? Yeah.
That's all we're looking for.
So that's the first piece, and now and the bar will be open when I'm through. So so we'll make sure that the second piece moves along as well. We do have a fairly well developed process that keeps us out of trouble. I think really the principal purpose of it is to keep us out of trouble. Keep us out of trouble with our members, keep us out of trouble with the public and otherwise. So it's a process that seems cumbersome. It's often, I tell people it's like, sometimes it's like molasses going uphill on a cold day. It takes a while to get there. But when we get there, we're firmly in that position, and there's generally a pretty broad consensus, and we're ready to move. One other thing I thought of to sort of give you a sense of the importance. Every year we have to file a tax return, with an informational return with the Internal Revenue Service, and tell them how much money there's no limits, but tell them how much money we spend in the various areas, and including affecting public policy. We tell them that we spend 12% of your assets, 12% of your resources on advocacy with the General Assembly, with the Congress, and before the courts. So this is an important piece of what you do, an important piece of what we do. So what are the triggering events? Well, legislation introduced. As Tim mentioned, somebody introduces a proposal that lawyers may view as not making any sense. It may have some underlying policy. It often the proposal can be worked out. I mean, if you go to the lawmaker, you find out what the underlying purpose is, it can be worked through, and people can come up with it. But a triggering event might be legislation is introduced. Another is a rule change proposed. Our court, Supreme Court, proposes about 6 or 7 times a year on average a change to the rules, or somebody proposes a change to the rules and the court asks for comments. And in virtually every case, the TBA, through the sections or committees, is making a comment trying to give the views of lawyers, so the court has a consensus view on those questions. But the area that y'all are most interested in is a committee or section initiative. If you want to see the law changed in an area, and this last year, construction law came up with a couple of things that had been changed that needed to be clarified, came up with a bill, we proposed it, got it adopted. So that kind of initiative coming from your section is another way to, another triggering event in the process. And finally, there may be an officer or a board member or staff that refers a matter to you. It could be legislation, but it also could be a rule proposal. It could be, occasionally we ask you your view on something that's before the ABA. ABA House of Delegates is reviewing a matter, and so and asking for your views on that. So those are the triggering events. Whoops, there's one more. Okay. ABA or some other entity proposes. So if the proposal is a matter of interest or concern to the profession. And that's the standard under the bylaws. If it's yes, then it goes, the recommendation needs to go to the House of Delegates for consideration. If it's not, then it goes directly to the Board of Governors. If it's not a matter of interest to the profession, it goes directly to the Board of Governors. So then can the House timely consider the matter? As I told you, the House meets quarterly. Often on these legislative developments, we don't know what's coming up early in the session, and late, and sort of that gap in there the legislature meets. We often don't have time for the House to anticipate all of these changes and to be ready to give a viewpoint. But we try to time the meetings of the House and try to anticipate for the House what may be coming, so that we can give them some warning on what issues there might be. But the next issue then is, can it be timely considered by the House? If it can, then it's considered for the House to make a recommendation. If not, then it can go directly to the Board of Governors. And believe it or not, there are issues that fall in that gap between two-week gap between the House meeting and the board meeting that require attention without the House. But it's just the way we have to act if we're going to be relevant to the process. And I think the folks in the House and the board all understand that. So can the Board of Governors timely consider the proposal? Sometimes the board meetings are not timed right either. If yes, then the board adopts or rejects or modifies the recommendation of the House, or it goes directly to the Executive Committee. Executive Committee, those 6 officers that I told you about, 6 officials within the association, and the others meets monthly, generally on a Monday afternoon, on a Monday afternoon, monthly on a regular schedule, when the board's not meeting, so that you have a monthly opportunity, and generally we can time something and make it work in that process. So if there's time for Executive Committee consideration, then it considers, adopts, rejects, or modifies the proposal. If there's not time for that, then the President decides. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. We have had to have situations like that. Generally, the President will ask, at least poll the Executive Committee, or be able to ask when today's electronic communications, be able to let the Executive Committee have some idea that something's coming up. But ultimately, the President does have the power to make that decision. So once the proposal is adopted, once the recommendation is adopted, the policy is adopted, how does it get implemented? So if it's a court rule, the President and the General Counsel, Executive Director, and generally you as the section or committee chair are on the recommendation to the court, or on the petition that goes back to the court, or on the comment that goes to the court. If we have any motions or other action to take, we try to do that in a sort of with the consensus among those 4 folks. So be aware that if your section develops something, you're probably going to be called on to be involved in that process, that piece of the process too. It's something we sort of handle from here, but we often ask you for the sort of first draft of what the comment is, and Bob's had to do that a time or two, and Frank as well. So, it's something that while we don't have the subject matter expertise, we do have the sort of relationship and the understanding of how the court operates and what their policy is here. But there is no rule on rules. The court has nothing written down. We know what the custom is.
It's like filing a little birdie fry, a short.
Yeah. Sort of. It may fall within the power to remonstrate with your government. If it's legislation, then it falls in my responsibility. along with our legislative counsel and Brenda Gadd to try to get the legislation adopted. We do have a great group of folks, the Government Affairs Committee, generally made up of lawyer lobbyists. We met over 2 weeks during the session with them, and they give us a lot of advice, but we have great lawyers too, legislative counsel, in Steve Cobb and Giff Thornton with Brad Lampley's help. And among the whole group of us, we're able to sort of cover most of the legislative needs that we have. What we are developing and what Josie's been working on the last 18 months? Close to 2 years. Okay. Close to 2 years. And Josie's, y'all should know, is her spouse is getting transferred to Washington with the military, and so she's following him. We tried to get her to stay, but and what Brenda's working on is more of a grassroots operation. We think we've got the sort of professional side of stuff covered, but we want more lawyers to be more in touch with their lawmakers and to have some opportunity to have those conversations back in the district. And so we're trying to build more of a grassroots operation. You may have seen, anybody here seen TBA Impact? When you go to the front page of the website. They have. TBA Impact is actually our grassroots operation, grassroots software. More than 1,000 members signed up who communicate with their legislators, either phone calls, email, letters, to tell lawmakers what they think. If it's ABA or other entity policy, the president, executive director, the relevant entity leader then move forward on that and file the recommendation. So once adopted, the public policy positions are cataloged in a document called the Public Policy Manual. So positions, once they're our positions, remain our positions until they're no longer our positions. We don't have to re-adopt everything. We think we probably got it right the first time, and if we didn't, we can always change it. But rather than having to go back and re-adopt all the policy is laid out in that public policy document. We review that annually with the House of Delegates and the Board of Governors, and as I said, it remains our policy as long as it's our policy. So I am through.